Some providers know that I'm a former CQC inspector and have contacted me and asked for advice about how to prepare for a CQC inspection. And they've said, is it worth doing a mock inspection, or should I be going through my risk assessments and care plans to make sure that everything's in order? What can I do to prepare for a CQC inspection? And the difficult truth to tell them is that while there may be all sorts of care consultancies around telling them, yes, we can come and prepare for your inspection and stuff like that, it's basically not possible to prepare for a CQC inspection. And the reason for that is that the Care Quality Commission is a failed regulator using a failed inspection methodology. And the methodology is so broad, is so loose, even though it looks official and organised and professional and scientific, it's none of those things. It's garbage. The actual experience of inspectors coming to do an inspection of a care home or a hospital or a dentist practice or some other fucking thing will be purely random. The process will be purely random, and it'll be driven by a number of factors. If there's been a complaint from, say, a relative or some other professional, or if a purchasing organisation such as Kent County Council has previously been to a service and given it a poor inspection report, a poor contracts report, CQC will take the line of least resistance and go in and look for things that are wrong. It says it's looking for good, but it's not looking for good. It's looking for things that are wrong, because if there's been a complaint in the service, you're obviously not going to go in and find that everything's okay, because then there'll be question marks about your competency as an inspector, and you've then got to argue the case with the relative about why the relative complained, but you said everything's okay. Or you've got to argue the case with Kent County Council Contracts Department, who have said there are all sorts of problems, but you've said it's okay, and vice versa. If there haven't been any complaints, or if there's been a good purchasing contract from Kent County Council or some other fucking organisation, you're swimming against the tide if you go in and say that there are problems, aren't you? And so you say that everything's okay. You look for things that are good, and you can take one situation and you can either give it a bad interpretation or you can put a positive spin on it. So, for example, a resident has a fall in a care home. You can say, well, that's dreadful. The home should have taken action to have mitigated, is the official word, but in plain English, reduce the risk, and the home have failed, and this fall is a sign of a failure in a home. Or you could say, well, it's most unfortunate that someone's had a fall, but people do have falls. The home has taken lessons to learn from the fall. New steps have been taken to reduce the chance of it happening again, therefore everything's okay. You can take one situation and take 1,000 situations. You can give it a negative or a positive interpretation. It's easy to do. You can actually, and then in doing that, you're sort of manufacturing evidence, aren't you? Evidence doesn't sit around like shells on a seashore waiting to be picked up. Evidence is always manufactured. Evidence is always a function of what it's evidence for. And so when people are called to do an inspection of a home, that's one of the backdrops. It can go either way. It's purely random. Or it could be an inspector or a local group of inspectors think that a particular service provider is a poor provider for one reason or another, or they've fallen out with them in the past, or the provider's argued back, in which case they go in and look for problems, look for faults, write a bad report, and vice versa. People may like a provider and they go and look for good. Or it could be some inspectors who, and quite a few do, have unresolved ego problems and like to swagger around telling providers how they should be running their care homes, and let their own personal opinions about what is good practice intercede into what should be a neutral judgment. There are fads of the day within CQC, so CQC may have a fad on diet and nutrition or pressure care, pressure ulcer care or some other thing, and the instruction has gone out that for this particular subject a very strict approach will be taken, with the expectation that inspectors locally will find problems, will find fault. All of these things add up to the inspection process being a swirl of factors, political and ego, political, organisational and personal factors, which means that when an inspector walks through the door, you can't predict. You can't predict what they're going to do. You can't prepare for it in a meaningful way because it's not a neutral process that can be sort of anticipated or predicted in any way. And you may well say, well, if that's a fucking case, CQC fucking inspection reports must be garbage, and that's true. They are complete fucking garbage that are totally divorced from any semblance of the real world. The quality ratings that they offer are meaningless junk. So if a service is rated as being poor, it's a poor service. It could just as well be good. In terms of the quality of care it provides, if a service is rated as good, it could just as well be poor. I've been party to numerous inspections where services have been given a quality rating that is wholly at odds with any reasonable interpretation of the evidence, with any reasonable understanding of the quality of care people are actually receiving. The whole process is grossly unfair and is a product of a failed regulator. CQC, without doubt, should be abolished. And a system of regulation that is actually earthed in the lived experience of people using services should be introduced. But of course none of this is going to happen, and CQC will carry on. The principal purpose of the Care Quality Commission is to carry out political goals that have been set for it by the Department of Health, that's the truth, and to justify its own existence. And of both of those things, it's pretty good, because when you see people, when you hear people talking about CQC, they take it seriously. They take the quality ratings seriously, even though they're obvious, demonstrable trash, garbage. They take them seriously. They think that if CQC says it's a poor home, it must be a poor home, whereas in fact the opposite is probably true. They take it seriously, but CQC and the regulation of health and social care services is a giant confidence trick on the public. It's a fucking disgrace, really, but that's just how it is. And so my answer to registered homes providers when they contact me is that there's very little that can be done. I mean, I could go through the motions of looking at risk assessments, doing mock inspections and stuff like that. Could go through the motions, but that will not be a predictor. That will not be a predictor of the quality rating and the final inspection report they actually get from CQC, for all the reasons that I've outlined.